Hi, I'm Kate Woodman, and in this tutorial we're going to be covering how to create an interesting narrative story within our images. I think a lot of photographers approach photography from a very technical perspective. We're focused on our camera settings, we're focused on lighting, and all of this stuff is really important, but I see a lot of people struggling with creating interesting images. And I think what's missing is a storytelling aspect to it. Something that a viewer can relate to, something that gives a narrative. And in this tutorial, that's what we're really going to be focusing on. I'm going to show you everything about my process using a case study for this tutorial. So everything from coming up with a concept, putting together a mood board, putting together a narrative arc. You'll be with me on location as I shoot this. We're at the Ungut Arts Hotel, which was the inspiration for this entire concept. I probably will shoot from a little bit further down. I'm seeing this nice diagonal composition, so it creates a really nice leading line. I will be showing you post-production as well. We have this little bit of the ceiling showing here. So I'm going to use our plate to extend our curtain up to the ceiling. And you'll see everything kind of come together from beginning to end. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll have an idea of how you want to create your own story in your images. Every story starts with some kind of inspiration, and for me, I find inspiration in so many different places. I find inspiration from other photographers, I find it from other artists, I find it from sculptors. You can find inspiration pretty much anywhere as long as you're receptive to it and open to looking for it. When I get an idea, and it can be anything from just a color that really struck me that day, that seemed really interesting, I want to incorporate that into a shoot, or I go to this perfect location and have a whole storyline develop around it. It doesn't matter. Every time that happens to me, I make a note of it. I write it down in a notebook, I put a note on my phone, because what happens is sometimes you're not always going to be motivated. You're not always going to be able to create that inspiration on the fly. If you write it down, you can always go back to it. You have a resource. You can look it up and say, oh, look, like this is a concept I had before. Then I can start really expounding upon an idea and creating it and having it evolve. One way that I like to do this is by use of a mood board. So I'll have an idea, and then I start trying to find visual inspiration for that. Anything from a color palette that I want to incorporate, poses that I might want to use, the type of models, the type of styling, etc. And I kind of group all of this together in one cohesive package. And then all of a sudden you see this thing formulate before your eyes. So the inspiration for this particular project came at me from a couple different angles. So I had initially wanted to do a project loosely based off of painters and their color periods, essentially. So Picasso went through his blue phase and Van Gogh went through a yellow phase. And they sort of utilized color at a period of their lives to reflect the emotions that they were going through. And then sort of fortuitously, we came across this location, and every floor has different rooms that are all of these different colors. So one floor will be the yellow floor. So this room is completely yellow, top to bottom. And there are 4 different colors throughout the hotel, as well as a couple public spaces that have this intense shock of one particular color. When we came across this hotel, I was like, great, I can put together this painterly idea here and infuse it in that, a realm of color that's just going to be all-encompassing and kind of like in your face. On top of that, I personally am really inspired by relationships. having an interesting dynamic between two characters, not necessarily always a happy one. You know, sometimes I'm more intrigued by tension in relationships and the dissolution of relationships too. That's something I wanted to incorporate in this particular concept. So we have all of these different components. We have the artist aspect, we have the infusion of color and using color to create a mood. There's the relationship aspect. So everything starts to come together and you start to pre-visualize this. Now that in and of itself doesn't create a story, but it's a really good starting point. Now we have kind of visuals, we have an idea of where we want this to go, and now we can start building that narrative. Stories can take a lot of different forms, but ultimately there's kind of this overarching formula that makes them all work for the viewer, and this is called the narrative arc. We start with an introduction, setting the scene for the viewer. Next we have our rising tension, and that's basically the plot development of the storyline. After that we have the climax, where everything comes to a head. It's a pivotal moment in the scene. Finally, we have our resolution, the ending to the story. It's what happens after the climax. The couple lives happily ever after, somebody dies, whichever way your storyline goes. I personally like to leave the ending a little bit ambiguous. That kind of leaves something to the viewer's imagination and helps them engage with the storyline a little bit more. But ultimately, you need to have some kind of resolution to conclude the story and say this is a good stopping point. All four of those components there is critical to making sure your audience engages with your story. So the next thing I want to talk about is theme, and theme is something that is going to be sort of an overarching element of your storyline. It's going to apply to your entire narrative arc, to your plot. And kind of related to theme is emotion. You know, we as human beings connect with emotion. We relate to that. You know, that's what makes us engage with an image in the first place. So emotion is something that is really important to my stories and what I want to tell. I want someone to look at an image and be able to read an expression on someone's face, whether it's elation, whether it's sadness, whether it's an intensity. I think we can use theme and we can use our narrative arc to add depth and create layers. So maybe the second time around you see something you didn't see the first time. Maybe you noticed a prop you didn't see the first time. Maybe you even noticed a character in the background you didn't see the first time. By adding those little subtleties to your images, it adds a maturity to an image you wouldn't necessarily otherwise have. So I understand how intimidating it sounds to have all of these aspects and trying to remember to incorporate all of these things into a story. We can still add layers and add complexity to an image, even if the parameters are confined, even if it's a tight shot and a tight portrait. We can use color to tell that story. We can use emotions to engage with the viewer. So I think all of this is scalable, and that's something that's still really important to keep in the back of your head, regardless of the complexity of the image you're trying to shoot. What I like about all of these different parameters is it keeps me accountable. So anytime I'm struggling through the process, if I don't know where to go in the storyline, or if I don't know where to place certain props in the scene, I go through that checklist. I say, you know, am I hitting this narrative arc? Does it make sense as far as the plot and the storyline? Am I getting emotion into the scene? Am I following the theme? Does everything kind of tick off that checklist? And if it does, then I'm going to have a much more successful story. We talked about creating an interesting narrative, using a narrative arc, using theme, using emotions, all of these different components put together to make an interesting story. Now, as photographers, we have to do this in a finite number of images. So you really need to make sure that you are getting all of the necessary detail in each image to properly convey that storyline. Now let's talk a little bit about the quantity of images you need to make a story. I don't think that there is one perfect number. If you have enough detail, if you have enough components, if the storyline is concise enough, you can create a world within a single image. So how do we take these things like theme and emotion and layers and adding complexity and represent that visually in our storyline? I like to start with framing personally. Framing helps to give context, and it helps to showcase the important aspects of your image. You can get really close into a character because that character is so important to your storyline that that's all that really is, and that's all that matters. We can also approach framing from different angles. So we can kind of obscure behind a door, for instance, and that has a voyeuristic feel to it. We can shoot from up above to give a sense of vulnerability. If you're looking down on someone, they're beneath you, they're smaller than you, they're vulnerable. And conversely, we can flip that around. If we shoot from a lower angle looking up at someone, that can give them a sense of power and a sense of presence. That's going to convey a certain emotion just by where you put your lens. Lighting is another strategy that we can use to help facilitate the narrative. If you want a really moody scene, maybe you're going to use dim lighting, you're going to use a hard light source, you're going to create as much shadow as possible because that adds kind of an intensity to the scene or a somberness to it. Or you could go the other way around. You could blow everything out. You could use a lot of really soft light, and that's going to give it more of an ethereal quality or maybe a kind of a high-key, happy feel to it as well. For me personally, I really like to use lighting in a way that feels motivated. I don't want to use lighting that draws attention to itself or doesn't make sense in the context of what's happening within the scene. So for me, that's if you're using a lamp in the space, I want whatever light is hitting my subject to feel like it's coming from that lamp. And I think this adds to the believability of the storyline. It makes it feel almost like your viewer is there with you. They're kind of immersed in the scene. Color is also an incredibly powerful tool in storytelling. We as humans associate colors with so many different things. They bring in so much context. And knowing that and kind of having a grasp of how those colors react with you or with anyone else, we can harness that power. We can use that color in different ways. We can overwhelm people with that color, using a lot of it to instill like a very strong sense of whatever response you're looking for. We can use it subtly. We can use just a hint of it to draw our eye to a certain area. We can pair it with other colors to create either harmony or a discord, depending on what we're looking for within our storyline. We've been talking about all of these aspects that make a story interesting. We've been talking about the narrative arc, the theme, the visual aspects. How do we frame it? How do we compose it? How do we use color? We talked about inspiration. Now I want to look at the specific story that I came up with and kind of walk you through what that story is and how we went from concept to the creation of the storyline. This whole concept started with an idea of painters going through different color phases and using that color to express emotion. I then wanted to bring relationships into this. I'm really intrigued by relationships and dynamics between different people, and that's something I wanted to bring to the story. I think it helps having a variety of different characters to kind of play off of each other. And in order to represent all of those colors and all of those emotions, I wanted these characters to kind of go through all of those emotions themselves and experience those feelings. And so I thought about this couple that they just meet, it's kind of this magic moment. They hit it off, it's a happenstance meeting, and it progresses from there. So we start off in a purple room. It's a lounge space. This guy is sketching at a table, and this woman approaches him, and this is the spark. It's the beginning of the relationship. Next, we move to the red room. This is their relationship igniting. It's where the passion is, the fire starts. So I wanted the room to reflect that here. In the next room, the yellow room, this is where we've gone through the honeymoon phase. The initial passion is diminished to content happiness. Next, we move into the green room, and green is an interesting color because it's a color that we can associate with a number of conflicting emotions, but in the context of this story, I want to use it in a way that's more about the toxicity, the envy, the beginning of the end for them. Their relationship is starting to dissolve. Our next room is the blue room, and this is where everything falls apart, the climax of the story. So everything has been leading up to this, which is where ultimately our female character leaves our male character. And I want all of that emotion to shine through in that particular shot. So now we've gone through 5 different rooms, 5 different colors, 5 very different sets of emotions. And I think it's a really great starting point for our story. You know, it gives emotional complexity, it has a narrative arc, it has characters interacting with each other, but I think we still haven't quite addressed the complexity or the layering that I really want, and I want that to shine through. I want to add a little bit more of that to make it more dynamic and to make it more enticing for the viewer. Thinking back again to the artist component, what if he's an artist? What if he is just painting all the time? He's kind of attached to his easel. Maybe this is the cause of the dissolution of their relationship. Maybe him being so attached to his painting, it's what causes him to lose sight of her, and she grows detached from him and realizes that he's never going to pay attention to her, only his artwork. They're going through all these emotions throughout different periods in their life. They're experiencing it at different times. So I kind of want to hone in on time as this critical aspect of the story. And so the idea that struck me was to use a physical representation of time to show clocks within the scene and have that be a recurring thematic visual element in all of the shots. What if he is painting to stop time, to kind of freeze the moment? To create the conclusion of the series, I wanted to have this guy alone, she's left, standing in a room surrounded by all of his art. And in this shot, and only in this shot, is it revealed that this entire time he's just been painting those clocks. We think he's painting her because she is kind of the focal point in all of the images, but everywhere she is, or everywhere that he's looking at the scene, everywhere we think that he is painting her and focusing on her, there is a clock in her vicinity. And to keep a little bit of ambiguity in the story, I wanted him facing away. We can't read his expression. We can't really identify much of his body language. It's up to the viewer to determine how he feels about all of this at the end. Is he surrounded by his artwork and proud of his life's work? Or conversely, is he finally realizing that he has spent his life painting these clocks only to realize that he has lost the woman that he loves? So being able to have a little bit of that ambiguity, I think, helps to relate to the viewer a bit more. It creates a wider audience, it creates discussion, and that's something I think that is really successful in a narrative. So I wanted to give that to you guys as the viewer here to come along this journey with me and to understand what the story is. But being able to translate that visually is the next step in the process. And this is where storyboarding comes in. So now we know the story. The next thing to do is to storyboard it. And what storyboarding essentially is just getting this out visually on paper. It's great to look at your images next to each other as a whole and as a unit to start thinking about composition. You know, you don't necessarily want images to be too similar in composition, otherwise it starts feeling redundant, or vice versa. Maybe you don't want too much disparity in your composition because then it feels like it's all over the place. So when you storyboard, this is a way to get those ideas out on paper and to make sure everything is going to fit together as a cohesive story. So our first image is the purple room, and I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do we make these characters meet. So I'm thinking he's an artist. He's walking around, head in the clouds. He's got his sketch pad with him. He's got his painting supplies, and he drops it on the floor. This beautifully dressed woman comes up to him. She bends down, helps him to pick up his tools, and that's sort of how they meet. So next is the red room. This is where the romance starts. It's blossoming, and I thought a good way to kind of introduce his love of painting is to make it look like she's kind of sitting for a portrait for him. When I was looking through the images of this hotel, there was this really red room, and it actually had a standing clawfoot red tub in the space, and I thought that was just an interesting visual element. So I wanted to incorporate that into the shoot here. For the next scene, the yellow scene, I actually have 2 sketches for this. Sometimes you have an idea of what you want to do, or you have multiple ideas, and you're not really going to be sure what fits best until you actually shoot it. So for the first idea for the yellow room, I wanted it to feel like they had just woken up in the morning. So they're enjoying this morning together. She's sitting with breakfast in bed. He's got a sketch pad, and I have a mirror above the bed and a clock on the opposite wall. So then again, now that we know the story, we can infer that he is looking at the clock in the reflection of the mirror. For the second yellow concept, they're in their morning clothes. Maybe she's in a robe, he's in his pajamas. He is sitting by an easel and painting, and she's having her morning cup of coffee. They're a happy couple, just enjoying a nice morning. The next room is the green room, and for this particular shot, I saw in the location scout a picture of a green kitchen space. And I thought this was interesting because it's not a bedroom like the majority of the other rooms. It has another kind of element to it, and it feels a little bit more homey in that regard. And I thought that by adding a different part of a house into the storyline here, it helped kind of break up what could be a little bit more of a repetitive theme. So in the green room, I have our female character set a little bit further back. She is got the table set for dinner. She's drinking a bottle of wine. It's very obvious that she is waiting for him to come to the table and to enjoy dinner with her. But unfortunately, he is once again painting on his easel. So he's up closer to the camera. We now have created physical distance between our characters too, to show how they're separated, beginning to drift apart. The next room is the blue room, and this is the climax of the story. It's where their relationship really falls apart. And to me, I wanted to have a shot of her packing her clothes in a suitcase and actually leaving as that final note. I almost envision them in 2 separate spaces. So she is in the bedroom, she's folding her clothes, she's putting them in the suitcase, and he's actually in a separate room. We've created even more distance between these characters. We've put them in 2 physically separate spaces. And I also have all of these canvases that he's been painting are littered throughout the space, and they're a literal manifestation of how his art is taking over their lives. It's encroaching on their space. Those canvases are turned away, so we don't see the front of them, and we're not aware of what he's painting until the last scene. So our last image is the resolution. It's where our audience becomes aware of what he's been painting the whole time. So I want to treat this image a little bit different visually than the remainder of the scenes. I have him positioned in the middle of the room. He's facing away from the audience, so that leaves things a bit open-ended to the viewer and allows them to make up their own mind with regard to what he's thinking. He is surrounded by all of these easels and all of the canvases, finally with the clocks revealed. And this one, I kind of want to have it be more about this moment in the reveal and not about the surrounding color influencing this character. So I want to have an interesting light on the characters and on the easels, highlighting them in a specific way. Now, we will see when we start shooting whether or not we'll actually stick to these specific images. Sometimes your story changes, sometimes it evolves, and your characters come to life in different ways than you anticipated. So to recap, I think storyboarding is an incredibly powerful tool. It helps set the stage, it helps us identify how we're going to approach this project, how we're going to shoot it, everything from where we're going to position ourselves to what our lens choice is going to be, how tight we need to get, how far back we need to be. All of these logistical issues when we shoot something are kind of worked out when we storyboard, when we sketch this stuff out initially, and you're making a lot less work for yourself down the road. We have a really cool story, we have storyboards, we know what this is going to look like. How do we actually make this happen? What are the logistics that we need to take care of before we actually produce the shoot? The first thing I want to talk about is casting. Having the right character fit your concept is really crucial to making it believable and making it interesting. For this particular shoot, I had a vague idea in mind of what I wanted these characters to be. For our female character, I wanted her to have a very classic, timeless look. And for him, I wanted him to be this attractive guy who didn't really know that he was attractive because he was so into his own head and his own artsy world. The next thing we need to make these characters come to life and to complete that look is a discussion with your hair and makeup artist and your stylist. And these are discussions that you have beforehand, and then you kind of get your models on set, see them in real life in person, and then you can make adjustments as needed depending on what you see in person versus what you see in a set of images you get from an agency. The next thing is location. Location scouting is a really important part of this process, and to me, it's one of the more exciting parts. A location is often a source of inspiration for me, so I really love being able to create a narrative around a particular spot. Sometimes you're not always going to be able to access a location beforehand. It's great when you can get images of a space if you can send someone to location scout for you, but the reality of the situation is you will have times where you're going to show up sight unseen or with limited information about that space. But for me, when I first get into that space, it's when I really start seeing the story come to life. I can perceive the dimensions of that space. I can feel the space that I'm in and know what parameters I'm working with. I can make adjustments to my storyboard as needed based on locations and angles and what I now have to work with. Just leave that option open. You don't want to confine yourself in your storyboard so tightly that it doesn't allow for creativity, and let that location influence you and become part of that narrative. Here we are on set. We're at the Ungat Arts Hotel, which was the inspiration for this entire concept. I've seen images, we've had some people come and location scout, but I haven't been able to physically experience the space personally, and that's something that I really enjoy doing. It gives me the sense of scale, it gives me an understanding of what kind of space I'm working with, how I can orient people, and that's something you can't really get from pictures. A few things I want to talk about that are going to apply to all of the shoots that we do for this project. One is camera. I am going to be shooting the whole time with my Canon 5D Mark IV. My lens may change. Right now I'm on a 24-70, but I may mix it up depending on the space that we're in, the size of the space that we're in. I tend to shoot fairly wide, so my focal length may change too, but I'll give you those details as I go along through the shoots. Another important thing is an assistant. So Alex, if you want to walk in here, Alex is going to be our assistant for the entire shoot. He's going to be helping me with all of the light setups, making sure that everything that way goes smoothly and I can focus on the storyline. Anytime you can use an assistant, even for a personal project, it's really great. It helps take your mind off of all the technical aspects so you can really focus on making the shoot as good as it can be. Thanks, Alex.
Of course.
Another thing that I like to do for all these shoots is I like to get base plates when everything is done. So I'll have the models come in, we'll take the shot, we'll get it to where it needs to be, and then I'll strike them from the scene and I'll get plates of the space without anyone in them, without any distractions. And this allows me to have all of these details where maybe I missed something, I want to bring something back in post, composite it in later, and this allows me to do that. So with all that being said, let's talk about this particular scene and kind of get into what we're doing in this first shot. We're going to have our artist character sitting here. We're going to have our lady sitting at the bar. We're gonna have a surprise guest as our bartender. We brought in some props. We brought some drinks. We've got some bottles, again, to kind of add to the authenticity of it. I swung this chair around here, again, as kind of a foreground element, which you'll see when I start framing. I wanted to make this feel a little bit more intimate, really kind of focus on this space as its own secluded area, because this is where our model's gonna be. We wanna draw focus and attention to that without too much clutter. One of the more important elements here, although it's not particularly large, is our clock. And as you guys are aware, the clock is a really significant aspect of the entire concept. So now that we've talked a little bit about the set and the scene, what we're going for, I want to introduce you to our models. Let's bring Nick out here first. This is Nick. Nick's great. He's going to be our artist for the day, and he's pretty much just going to be intently painting this entire time. So he's going to get really good at that by the end of the shoot. Nick, I'm going to have you sit here to start. And then Carla is our leading lady, the lovely Carla. And she's going to be much more emotional throughout the scene. We're going to read the emotions in her body language and her face. And Carla is going to start over at the bar stool over here. So again, this is where they meet. She's kind of looking over his shoulder, sparking conversation, introduction, so on and so forth. I want to make a note here that both of these guys are professional models. They have some acting experience, and this is stuff that's really important to me when you're putting a production together like this. You really want to use people who have the ability to emote and to express the way that you need for the shoot to make sense. I want to talk a little bit about the wardrobe for this shoot. As you can see, everyone is wearing pretty much the same colors of the space that they're in, and that's going to be consistent throughout all of the shots. Nick is in something that is a little bit more muted. He's got a neutral shirt on and a pant that matches everything else. Again, this is going to be a recurring theme where he's in something that's a little bit less saturated throughout the series. Carla, on the other hand, she's a little bit more vibrant. She has some saturation to her outfits. She's bringing the emotion and the life to all of these different shots, and that's going to be reflected in her outfit. I want to go into lighting now. Lighting is something that's going to be really important for you guys to all understand, so we're going to walk through each of our lighting setups for each of these shots to really ensure that you guys know how this is set up. So, first I kind of want to address any sort of ambient light. As you can see, it's a pretty dark space. All of the curtains are closed. We don't really have a lot of ambient light. So for this one, we're relying pretty heavily on bringing in strobes and some constant lighting to sort of fill in the light of the space. We have an RE1K in the back corner here. What that's doing is it's just cascading light over the back curtains. It's giving us a lot of really cool texture. It's sort of defining the space that we're in, so it's not so much focused on these guys and everything else fades to black. Also back here we have an octabox. This is gelled purple to give everything a nice purple wash to fit in with the color scheme of our space. What it's doing is it's giving a nice rim light to our characters here and just kind of tying their coloring into everything else in the scene. We also have a silver umbrella, gelled purple. So this is triggering everything else, it's all of the other flashes in the space. And what this one is doing is it's adding a nice subtle purple wash to all of the shadows. So when I shoot an image, I really like to have a lot of detail in the shadows and not clip the highlights. I like having that nice dynamic range so that in case I want to adjust anything in post, bring those shadows up, I have the ability to do that. And by gelling this purple again, you know, it kind of gives this overwhelming wash of color to the space. And I think that's it as far as the overall room. We also have a couple lights that are addressing specifically our models. Our first one here is a gridded snoot, so this is going to hit Carla. It's not gelled unlike the rest of the lights, although we may change that later. And it's going to add just a really nice texture to her face. This is highlighting her as our focal point, as a main character. We really want to draw our attention to these characters as they're the most important part of the story. In addition to the snoot, we have a reflector that's with a pretty tight grid. I believe it's 10 degree, not gelled. And this one is hitting Nick right here. We're working in a space that we can be a little bit more flexible in terms of the light setup. You know, it's a lounge space. It may have some overhead lighting. So we really want these lights to feel believable and coming from a place that they may actually would in this particular scene. But we also want to make sure that they're highlighting the right people, the right characters, and giving them the attention that they deserve. The one last thing I like to do before we start shooting is I like to have a bit of a conversation with our models. So Nick, for you, we're starting you off, you're at the bar. You're not really thinking about anything around you. You're just kind of in your own little dream world, sketching in your sketch pad. And Carla, you're enjoying a nice drink at the bar, and you're kind of the instigator in this relationship. She's the one taking action while you're off in La La Land. We can kind of massage that and work into it. You know, if I see you guys posing in a certain way that I really like, or the light's hitting you in a really nice way, then we can kind of pause and tweak that and adjust that as necessary. One last character I want to introduce. We have a bartender. I'd like to introduce Mr. Rob Grimm here. Might look familiar to some of you. Hello, hello.
I love you, Kate Woodman.
Oh, you're so sweet. Rob's tending bar. I think he's got some experience in this. And yeah, maybe you're mixing a martini. Maybe you're cleaning things off. You know, you've just given her a drink. You're moving on to the next thing, and she's moving on to the next thing. You know what I'm saying?
I got it.
All right.
I got my motivation.
Cool. I think we're ready to get rolling. Take a couple test shots and see how everything looks. So I'm going to be situated in this area. I probably will shoot from a little bit further down. So I got a nice seat here conveniently. For my angle, I'm seeing this nice diagonal composition. So starting with Rob up here, Carla in the middle, and then Nick further down. So it creates a really nice leading line. As far as camera settings go, I am at 24 millimeters on a Sigma 24-70 lens. I am shooting at 1/80th of a second. f3.5 and ISO 800. And the 800 is to really kind of pick up the ambient light from the RA back there. So let's give this a shot. Got all our lights turned on, Alex? Cool. I just want to make sure that we're catching enough light on you. So we might want to wrap this one around a little bit more. The light on Carla looks really good. And the texture of her dress is really nice because it's picking up a lot of that light. Let's try that. We're still a little too hot on his face, and I think we might want to throw that CTO on the light. Maybe, what do we have, like quarter, half?
Yeah, bit quarter.
Let's try a quarter.
Sure.
I've put this light over here, kind of in the corner, as a potential motivated light source. So we might want to bring that in kind of next to him if we end up liking how this warmer gel looks, because then it looks like that light is coming from an actual lamp. Thanks. I think we could even go half, just to warm it up a little bit more. And then I like how that looks, so we might pull that lamp in, just kind of position it next to you, so it makes sense why that would be a warm light source. Anytime you can kind of make it seem like your light is coming from a believable light source, it's really going to add to the authenticity and believability of the scene. I'm going to grab you that pencil. It's hard to sketch without a sketching utensil. You can actually doodle in there if you want. Let's get him a drink.
Yellow or clear?
Let's go yellow. Yellow, purple, contrasting colors. Does that whole color theory thing?
That's strong. Okay.
Some strong apple juice you got there. All right, you got a drink, perfect. And again, Carla, you're just kind of like peeking over your shoulder. Maybe like a coy little smile, like, hey, look at me, I'm cute, pay attention. I like the color temperature here. Can we bring the light into frame? Maybe kind of like even right in front of the stand here. Sure. And when I get my plate, I'll just pull that light out.
Mm-hmm. Sitting right in here?
Yeah, which hopefully it doesn't block the light, but if it does, leave it off for a second because it's gonna add some spill. We may block some of that light with it, but we'll cross the bridge when we get to it. I think we can move the light a little bit closer to him. We may end up pushing him that way just a little bit, but let's just do this one step at a time here.
Out there.
Yep. Let's turn the light on, see what it does as far as ambient. We may have some spill we don't like, but this is an opportunity we can get a plate, you know, a couple shots with it on, with it off. See what we like. So this is adding some light spill onto the table. I do really like the motivational aspect of this light, so I think we're gonna stick with that. I wanna scoot this whole thing back like 6 inches or so if we can. And I think we're okay leaving that light there for now. But let's just get you kind of scooted back a tiny bit. That's probably good. Nothing too crazy. It's a nice arrow you got there. I have this bag next to him as well. You know, he's got to be carrying his sketchbook in something. So any kind of little detail that you can add to the set, to the scene, to increase the believability, make it feel more lived in, those are the details we want. Yeah, so I just shifted him over a little bit because we have a certain distance between Rob and Carla here, and then we had a little bit of a wider distance between Carla and Nick, and I wanted to just kind of close this gap a little bit more, just so the spacing is a bit more even. So I think we're good. The light on you looks great. Carla, I don't think we need to change too much with the light on you. We could warm that up a little bit, maybe with the quarter. I don't think it needs to be as warm as this one,
Sure.
but let's just throw that on. So I kind of like to address things one step at a time. Kind of helps keep me in check, and then if you change too many things at once, you don't like it, you don't know what to change back. Sometimes this is just kind of how you have to work into a scene. So I'm just checking my frame here. One thing I am noticing is I'm seeing this light stand here, and I'm seeing the yellow, especially from the sandbag below. This is the reason that you take plates. Sometimes you got to put a light stand where it needs to be to get the right light on a person, but it's obviously going to be in the scene. So you just scrap that once the shoot's over, pretty much clear everything out that's obsolete, and you get the plate of that. Now, as you guys probably notice, I am not shooting tethered. I am not shooting on a tripod. For me personally, I like having the option of being able to move around a little. So on some of these scenes, you'll see me kind of changing my elevation, changing my location. A lot of times I'll just find a composition kind of naturally working into it, and I don't want to lock myself down into one spot. Okay. I am focusing on Nick here. He's front and center. Again, he's kind of the main character here. And because I'm shooting at 3.5, I may have a little bit more blur as I go back, but I'm also shooting really wide. So we're still going to get a lot of detail the further back we go. I think the bar looks pretty good. We're getting some nice light on the clock. It's feeling a little bit cluttered with the wine glass, I think, so maybe kind of move that out of frame. And then if we can shift the shot glass and the, I don't know anything about alcohol, Rob, so you're gonna have to forgive my terminology here, but this jigger and your Everclear martini, shift this over to your left a little bit. All right, so I think bar probably looks good. Let's just double check that. So I'm happy with the set. I really like this leading line. I like this chair here as well as kind of this interesting foreground element. It's kind of like a big purple blob in front of the screen, but actually is nice because it adds depth and it obscures some of the details in the bar that we don't necessarily need to see. So let's work you guys into your poses. I think you're pretty much there anyway, but now that we've addressed everything else, we can focus on pinpointing exactly what we're looking for as far as emotion goes. One thing I want to note here is we just want to make sure that we're never really seeing what you're drawing or sketching, and that's going to be prevalent throughout the whole series. So when we have you painting on your canvas, we're always going to try to obscure the canvas so we're seeing maybe just the edge of it, because that's going to reveal something to the audience we don't want them to see until the end. So if you can actually pull up like the back of the page a little bit, yeah, perfectly. Yeah. And now I'm just getting an idea of what you're doing, but I'm not seeing exactly what it is. Cool. Nick, you look great. Just keep doing that. Maybe just a little bit more like intensity. Okay. And Carla, you're really trying to be like, hi, I'm over here. Look at me. What are you doing? You're really into him. So yeah, coy smile. You're just trying to make yourself as enticing for this guy who's not paying any attention to you. Maybe like lean back a little bit, like you're kind of looking over your shoulder. Yeah. I think head kind of tilted back, just because we have such a tight grid on that light. I just want to make sure we're getting your face kind of in the right light there. And I think if you can almost tilt your head back a little bit. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Can you bring your left hand a little bit further back on the stool? Even further. Yeah, perfect. Awesome. Rob's crushing it with the bartending over there. He's a pro. I don't need to tell him what to do. You had your legs swapped the other way. I'm just going to have you do so your left leg was over your right. Kind of neat. Yeah, perfect. And then I think I'll have you just kind of turn your shoulders, yeah, a little bit more. And again, that kind of little bit of a lean back, a little bit of a coy smile. Are you comfortable? Awesome. And even like we're catching you mid-pose where you're about to swivel around and this hand is maybe off the table, you're kind of turning your torso over to Nick. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, and even like stretching your neck out a little bit, like what you got going on down there? Cool. Looks awesome. Just for variety, I want to switch it up where you're standing. So maybe you kind of just gotten your drink at the bar. Maybe you even have like an elbow leaning on the bar, but again, you're kind of turning back towards him. Yep, perfect. And we might need to tweak the snoot on this one. Because she's a little bit higher now, we're gonna have to adjust that. If you want to turn the modeling light on for this, I don't have them on right now because they're kind of noisy and we've already got a lot of ambient noise in this space. But obviously it's a lot easier to know where your light is going, especially when you're dealing with gridded lights like this that have such a like a refined, small focal point. So we want to really make sure that it's hitting her in the right place. Cool. Thanks, Alex. And for you, I mean, you can kind of see that light too, and you know how it feels when it hits your face in the right way. So just kind of try to keep conscious of that. And if you feel like you're kind of getting out of the light, we can just work around that and we can adjust that as we need to. Excellent. Yeah, and just a little smirk maybe. Cool. Let's have you turn towards him a little bit more. Yeah, perfect. Nick's looking really intensely. Maybe he's furiously erasing. Flip the pencil over and you're just erasing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And Carla, you can even kind of lean into him a little bit more too. Okay, I'm gonna get a couple more frames. Let's switch up the stance one more time just so we have some options. You're gonna be like approaching him at this point, so you're gonna make the first move. And again, like kind of coyly smiling, yeah. And you can even like take a step, just like kind of rock back and forth like you're walking towards him. So we get kind of this effective movement. Yeah, perfect. Just do that a couple times. Awesome. Rob's pouring a mean drink back there. Hey Rob, do you have any flair bartending skills? Can you give me like a good shake?
Sure.
I've seen you do a little shake dance before. I know you can do it.
Shake and a shimmy.
Yeah.
Sure,
And you just do the same thing. Rob's gonna have his moment. Perfect. Cool. Awesome. All right. I'm feeling really good about this. I'm gonna look kind of, I like to scroll through the back of my camera and make sure I didn't do anything like misfocus or have lights misfire on a shot that I think was kind of the hero shot, but everything is looking really good. Key things that I'm looking for when I'm doing this final checklist, I want to make sure I'm capturing the emotions of our characters. So I think we have more than enough of everyone kind of playing the character, getting into their role. These guys are doing a great job. I want to make sure all of the thematic elements are contained within the scene, all of the important items that we want to see. Our clock, do we have some nice light on that? And we do. And just making sure that overall lighting feels good, everything feels kind of believable, and I think that's where we're at right now. I've got my selects here for our purple shot. I want it to look like she's about to approach this guy. So I felt like the standing shot worked a little bit better for this one. I also have our blank plate here. I'm not gonna do really any adjustments here for these because I think they look pretty good in terms of highlights and shadows. Sometimes if I do have something that's a little bit blown out, I'll adjust highlights or try to capture a little bit more shadow detail in capture, but I think because it's fairly well lit, we don't really need to make those adjustments here. I will just open these. Usually I go edit with, and whatever your most up-to-date Photoshop is, export as a TIFF 16-bit so I can get as much color information as I can. I like to edit in Adobe RGB and 300 DPI for my resolution. So here are our two images, our plate and our hero shot in Photoshop. First thing I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna drag our plate over onto here, close this guy out. So now I have both layers in one shot, just to keep things easy. And I'm gonna hide that for now. So a couple things that we want to address in this image. One, we have the light stand kind of peeking out around the corner here, so obviously I want to get rid of that. And then we have this little bit of the ceiling showing here. I don't think this is adding anything nice to our shot, so I'm going to use our plate to extend our curtain up to the ceiling, just so we don't have this in the image. So let's start with that. Here's our plate without our light stand. And I usually just kind of play around with the opacity of this guy to see both layers simultaneously, and then I'm gonna scale this as needed so I'm fitting our plate to our hero shot. So we just need to increase the size of this a little bit. I wanna make sure that for this area, since we're focusing in the bottom of the floor, I'm aligning our lines in the floor. Let's see, maybe we can shift our perspective a little bit here just to get those aligned a bit better. And again, I'm just focusing on this corner here right now, so we'll worry about the curtain later. And I'll just make a layer mask, invert this. Control I invert, Command I if you're a non-PC user. And then I'm just gonna come in and paint that guy away. And I'll just kind of get the whole section here, so I'm not worried about my floor tile alignment too much. I think that cord We'll just have to clone that out because it's in both shots. And just zoom in, make sure we're getting that line pretty clean here. Whatever way you mask that's easier for you, go for it. But I just, for me, tend to find it a little bit quicker if I just do it by hand. All right. So that, my friends, is how you get rid of a light stand base. And next I want to address our curtains up here. So I'm just going to duplicate this again, this layer. We'll get rid of our layer mask, change opacity, and then for this guy, I'm just going to move it up, get it pretty close, and just cheat our curtain up a little bit. Because of the pattern and the texture in the curtain, I think we can probably get away with just doing a soft mask in here, hiding it. So again, layer mask, invert it. Come down in my flow too, so it blends together a little bit more. And we can see we've got some not quite right overlapping of our curtains here, but I can just shift a little bit. Scale it. Oh, that looks pretty good. I always like to just check my mask here and make sure I'm not missing out any important bits. Again, like, that's a fairly quick job for that, but it's not really a super critical part of the image. We're really just going to be focusing on him and her. And because we have all of that texture in the background there too, I don't necessarily need to be super precise with that. You can go in and take your time and make sure this is perfect, but I'm not going to worry too much about it right now. The next thing that I see here that I want to fix is the color shift between the curtains in the background and the purples in the chairs and the shadows that are casted in the rest of the image. The curtains feel a little bit too magenta to me, a little bit too red, so I'm going to go and change that. There are a bunch of different ways we can do this, but I think the easiest way to start is to try a hue saturation layer. And I'm not going to look at anything else right now except for that back curtain. And I'm just gonna shift that until it feels like we're at a good color here. Obviously, this is affecting the whole image. It's making their skin tones look kind of gross, but we will just mask that out. Just gonna start real big, soft brush here just to get a sense of where this is all going, and then I'll come in and refine that mask as needed. And this helps me just kind of identify if the color looks pretty accurate. If we're feeling the shift, we want to make any adjustments to that color shift. Color-wise, it feels pretty good, but it's feeling a little bit saturated, so I might make that a bit more blue and come down on the saturation a smidge. Pretty happy with the color, so now I'm just going to come in. The nice part about this is we're not shifting the color too much, so I don't have to worry about being super precise in these edges here. There are certainly situations where you need to be really careful about your masking, but this one we can kind of be a little bit more loose. I'm already looking at his face and skin tones here and seeing a couple things that I want to adjust once we get this done. We're not seeing too much of the color in the shadows here, so I'm not worried too much about what's going on, but we'll give it a quick pass. All right, cool. So, without, with, color shift. I think in most of the rooms we have a pretty monochromatic color scheme, and all of the tones are pretty similar to each other with the exception of wardrobe. So I want to keep that continuous throughout all of our shots here. So by bringing those purples in line with each other, it helps make the series more cohesive. So I want to bring a little bit of color back in to the highlights on his face here. So we'll create a solid color. And this way, if I want to go and adjust whatever that tone is, maybe make it a little bit more yellow here. And I'm going to invert my mask, set it to color, and hit his face. Obviously, this is super intense right now, so I'm gonna back off our intensity a bit. And then what else I'm gonna do is I'm gonna apply this just to our highlights. So if we go to Image, Apply Image, we're just gonna hit the highlights here. When we toggle this on and off, it just adds a little bit more warmth to his face. And it helps blend with the color that we're getting on his arms already. I may come in and maybe pull that up a little bit more. That looks pretty good. You could play around with that on the lamp as well if you wanted to come in and add some more warmth in the lamp glow there. Maybe not to the shade, however. I'm gonna clone out this cord. So just create a new layer. Let's see what happens if we just try to use our spot healing to start. Not bad. We got rid of our line on the floor here though, so I'm just gonna clone that in, sample that from current and below. Here we go. So toggle that on and off. We got rid of our cord. Let's play around with the saturation of their outfits, because I know I mentioned when we were talking about the shoot and talking about the styling, we wanted his outfit to be a little bit more desaturated and her outfit to be more saturated. So we can play around with that here. Again, I'm going to use a hue saturation layer, drag down our saturation, and then we can adjust as needed layer, invert that brush, and I'll just brush in on his shirt. Get rid of some of those purple tones here. And then same with his pants. Just take a little bit of that color away. I don't want to go too crazy because then it just starts to look unnatural, but I think something like that. You can pull it down a little bit more. Yeah. Saturation wise, I might tweak the color a little bit, the hue. So again, hue saturation. I think I want to make this a little bit more red. So again, invert that layer mask brush. And these are all like pretty subtle adjustments because when you get it right in camera, we're pretty much 90% of the way there. So less work in post, which is nice. And again, because we're pretty close in tone to everything around it, I don't have to be super precise in my masking. So let's check that. That one. Let's stick to color. I just like to go back and kind of sanity check what I'm doing as I'm going, because sometimes when you're building up layer by layer by layer, you can definitely go too far. If you need to back down, you always can do that. One thing I really like to play around with is this black and white layer. And this is going to go up top here. So I will set this to a luminosity blend mode. So I'm just affecting luminosity. I'm not affecting the actual hue at all. We're on a default mode for the black and white layer. If I toggle this on and off, you can see that it's really affecting the magentas and the purple tones in the image. So what I like to do is go through and toggle the different presets just to kind of see if there's anything in here that looks particularly interesting. Our green filter, I like the lighting effect that we're getting across the curtains, that kind of gradient. but also it is a lot of texture and it's a lot of pattern, and it definitely draws your eye. So I can kind of mask in our black and white layer back here, and since we've created a layer mask for that already, you're just seeing that luminosity of the purple in the background just come down a little bit. And I might back off a little bit, either in opacity here, I can adjust it this way. Maybe it's too much, maybe I just want to cut it down a little, or I can come in here and I can adjust my magentas down here. So I think by just bringing that down a little bit, it makes her pop off the page a little bit more, which is what we want. Now I want to come in and start playing with dynamic range a little bit. Now I think we're at a good place to start dodging and burning. So I want to draw attention to the characters, to the clock, and hide anything extraneous in the image. So I'm going to create a dodge layer here first. I usually do this in curves. I'll just go in and drag my midpoint up here and invert that. And I'm going to be working at a super low flow. Let's go with 1%. See how that looks? For him, I'm not sure he needs too much here. I'm gonna start carving out the details in her face and her dress, because her face is a little bit darker than his, so I want a little bit more light. Just kind of pop the highlights on her face a little bit more. Nothing too crazy. I don't want it to look super obvious, but just a hint more light. Maybe a little bit more on her forehead. The scale of both of their faces is pretty small, and when you have an awesome makeup artist, you don't really need to do a whole lot dodging and burning, but I may just come in and smooth out a couple details. It's pretty common to have this kind of darker spot between the eyebrows, especially with that kind of hard light on her face, but otherwise I think I want to keep it fairly natural looking as well, so I don't want to spend too much time on that. And when I dodge and burn, I kind of like to follow existing highlights just to kind of make them pop out a little bit more. It's nice having this satin dress here because you can very obviously see where all of the highlights are. So I'm just going to follow them very subtly. When you're dodging and burning, to me, it shouldn't look like you're really doing a whole lot. Until you toggle it on and off, it should be pretty subtle. But I'm just trying to get all that texture in her dress, all the detail. And like I said, it doesn't seem like much, but when you see it all together, it really does make a difference. Just this little bit of a dark spot in her shoulder that I just want to clean out a little bit. She also has this bruise down on her leg. Because of that purple gel that we use to fill, in darker areas it's going to apply more of that color. So there's going to be a bit of color shift when we try to dodge and burn it. And that's part of the challenge of using gels. But we'll just address it in a different way. Again, just smoothing out some of the details on her leg here. It's so small that it's not super noticeable. Maybe bring out her hands a little bit darker. Bring that out a little bit. Just makes it pop a little bit. We also have this nice highlight kind of on the back of the chair here. Just gonna go over that. And it's really just like following the pre-existing light patterns and just making them pop a little bit more. Let's get this clock over here. Has these cool Art Deco features, this glass, just to showcase that part of our scene a little bit more. Get the base of it here, and then really just get these clock hands too. Now I think we can see the clock a little bit more. It's a little bit more well-defined. I like showcasing a little bit of the stuff at the bar here, but I don't want to draw too much attention to it. I think that is good as far as our dodging. There's not a whole lot I would want to darken here. We already darkened the curtain in the back, But I might play around with making Rob a little bit darker here, just because it's really about their story, these two guys. Looks pretty good. Let's go back to our adjustment layer here, and I'm just gonna take care of that bruise on her leg really quick. And I can just clone that from a different part. And I've already burned that, so it's looking a little hot right now. I'm gonna come in and just erase what I had already dodged, so I don't have that hot spot there. Perfect. Let's just do a quick toggle on and off again. Before, after. I think it looks pretty good. I'm not seeing a lot that I want to address as far as color grading in this image, because we did so much color grading during the shoot by the space itself, with their wardrobe, with all of the gels that we used. So it really makes it so that we have to really put in minimal effort as far as color grading in post-production. The more we do on set, the less we have to do after the fact. One of the things that I really like to do is give this a little bit more of a painterly feel, and I actually have an action that does that. So I'm going to open up our actions here. This is from my PRO EDU actions collection, and I'm going to run the Mona Lisa. And the Mona Lisa affects the dynamic range, so we get a little bit more detail in the shadows and a reduction in highlights as well. So it just compresses that dynamic range and makes it feel more like a painting. All right, so this is it run. You can see we have a little bit more detail in those shadows. Our highlights are brought down a bit. It's a little bit too strong, so I'm gonna come in and just adjust within here. I might adjust opacity. Sometimes I literally just come in and run all of these one by one just to see what I'm getting here. Each of these indicates what it's doing, but it's nice to kind of get a feel firsthand. This is the one that's really bringing up the blacks here in the shadows. So I think that one I might come down a bit on opacity. This one as well. I think I'll get rid of reduce luminosity and crush blacks, and just maybe I'll come down to about 80% on this. So I like the feel of this. I think I still want a little bit more light on her face, so I'm going to cut down what that's doing here just by masking it out. All right, so now that we've added this adjustment, sometimes when you are adjusting the overall contrast and you had some areas where you had a lot of shadows and you get more detail, certain things become more noticeable now than they were before. So I'm starting to see a little bit of something funky going on up here. So I'm going to go and revisit our layer back here. This is our curtain extension layer. Yeah, and it looks like I just didn't quite come down low enough. I'm seeing a smidge of that ceiling left. So I'm going to come back in. And I'm going to paint that line a little bit more. If you look at what I'm actually doing in my layer mask too, I'm just trying to kind of blend the two together a little bit more organically. So just kind of extending down the lines where our curtains actually come down. Maybe come down the top of her head here. Just makes it less noticeable where we blended the two together. You can also use help layers to do this as well. I don't use help layers all that often personally, but I know a lot of people do. So if you want to come in and bring in a curves layer and crank up the luminosity of the overall image to make sure you're not, have these kind of issues in shadows, it's not a bad idea. So I'm going to save this again. I'm pretty happy with this right now. The one thing that kind of sticks out to me right now is this lamp, and because I was shooting at a wider angle, we're getting some distortion at the edge of the frames. and the lamp is a little bit askew. I'm gonna try and stamp this layer so I have the final product of the lamp, and then I'm just gonna copy it and clone it and make some perspective tweaks on it. I may need to come back to my plate when I do this, but let's just try it first. So I'm just gonna grab this guy. Copy and paste it. And just kind of mess around with my perspective here. So the base of this is still a little bit skewed, but to me that's okay because it's kind of following the patterns of the floor. But I like how the lamp shade now is a little bit more straight up and down, as is the lamp stand here. So I'm gonna hit return on that. So our lamp is situated where we want it to be, but obviously we've got a couple issues here and down here. So let's see if we can't address that. So first things first, I'm just gonna make a mask. I'm gonna come in and particularly at this curtain area, I'm just gonna mask that out. We'll go around the base of our lampshade as well so we don't get any weird lines and disconnects in the curtain in the background. It's kind of hard to see, so here maybe we will bring in a curves layer just to identify what we're doing. There we go. Now we can see it. And go back in and mask that out. And again, I'm using a brush that's pretty soft. And this, I think, just helps make the transitions less obvious. Okay. This is something I might try to address just by some cloning. Create a new layer here underneath the adjusted lamp, so anything that we do under this is going to be hidden. And again, this is pretty dark and we have a pretty forgiving pattern in the curtains as well, so I can be a little bit more cavalier about this. Just trying to sample from like a really close area here. All right. Now we can turn that off. Just group those together. All right, so just toggling this on and off a few times, that feels much better to me. And now I can really just focus on the characters in the shot instead of this distracting lamp in the foreground. So I think that is pretty much it for this shot. We covered making color adjustments as needed to both their wardrobe and the background. We dodged and burned to bring out certain areas that we wanted to highlight and dull down areas we didn't want to see as much. And we made some tweaks to the light stand, extending the curtain and fixing that lamp. So I think the composition is really nice and strong. Her expression is good. We're getting that newly blossoming interest in her body language and her expression. He's really showcasing that intensity that we were looking for with him drawing, with the shift in elevation between Rob as the bartender and her being a little bit higher, and then it's duplicated with him seated and the lamp a little bit higher next to him. I think that's a nice repeating pattern there. The foreground element of the chair, I think, is interesting. It adds some depth to the scene. So all in all, I think a pretty successful way to start off the story.